I never knew a single letter could destroy everything I believed about my grandmother. My name is Hannah Kaufman, I'm 58 years old, and what I discovered inside a leather-bound box hidden beneath her floorboards changed every story I had ever been told about our family's survival during the war. Inside were documents written in a handwriting I didn't recognize, letters filled with impossible tenderness, dangerous secrets, and a love that should never have existed. The truth inside those pages would challenge everything I thought I knew about mercy, about enemies, and about the thin line between survival and betrayal. You will be deeply moved by this story. Let me begin from the very start. The winter of 1944 descended upon the Polish countryside like a curse. Snow fell in thick, suffocating curtains, burying the skeletal remains of burned villages and turning the forests into vast white graveyards. The war had stripped the land bare. No crops, no livestock, only the hollow shells of farmhouses and the occasional flicker of lamplight behind shuttered windows where survivors huddled against the cold. It was in this frozen wasteland that Sarah Lewandowska fled with her infant son pressed against her chest. She had been running for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the ghetto liquidation, since the soldiers had torn through the streets with their lists and their rifles, since she'd watched her husband David shoved onto a cattle car bound for a place whose name she would only learn years later. 3 weeks since she'd crawled through a drainage pipe with her newborn son Isaac wrapped in her coat, his tiny body warm against her racing heart, his silence both a blessing and a terror. The farmhouses she passed were either abandoned or hostile. Once she'd knocked on a door, desperate for milk for Isaac, and the woman who answered had looked at her with such hatred that Sarah had stumbled backward into the snow. "Jew!" the woman had spat, and slammed the door so hard that Sarah felt the echo in her bones. She'd learned not to knock after that. The cold was the worst enemy now. Isaac had stopped crying 2 days ago, which frightened her more than his wailing ever had. His little face had gone pale, his lips tinged with blue. She tried to nurse him, but her own body was failing, starved and exhausted. Her milk had nearly dried up. Each time she looked down at his tiny, still face, she felt a scream building in her throat that she couldn't release. She walked through the night because movement was warmth. She walked because stopping meant death. The snow soaked through her worn shoes, shoes she'd taken from a dead woman in the ghetto, and her feet had gone numb hours ago. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. Couldn't feel much of anything except the terrible, relentless cold and the weight of her son in her arms. When she finally collapsed, it was at the edge of a vast field bordered by a dark forest. The snow received her gently, almost tenderly. She curled her body around Isaac, trying to shield him with what little warmth she had left. Above her, the stars burned with indifferent brilliance. She thought of David, wondered if he could see these same stars, if he was even still alive. She whispered his name once, then Isaac's, then closed her eyes. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching through the snow. Colonel Klaus Weber, retired, though the title still clung to him like the scent of gun oil, stood at his kitchen window, a glass of schnapps untouched in his hand. He'd been standing there for nearly an hour, watching the snow accumulate on his property, on the bare fields that had once yielded wheat and potatoes but now grew nothing but ice. He was 56 years old, though he felt ancient. The war had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. He'd served on the Eastern Front until a Russian shell had torn through his left shoulder in '43, leaving him with limited mobility and a medical discharge. He'd returned to his family's farm in occupied Poland, a farm that now felt less like home and more like a prison of memories. His wife Anna had died of pneumonia the winter after his return. His 2 sons were both gone, Friedrich killed at Stalingrad, Johann missing somewhere in France. The house echoed with their absence. Sometimes Klaus would set the table for 4 out of habit, only to realize midway through the meal that he was eating alone. He'd stopped listening to the radio, stopped reading the newspapers that arrived sporadically from Krakow. He knew what was happening, knew about the camps, about the deportations, about the machinery of death that his country had built. He'd seen enough during his service to understand the scope of it, though he'd never participated directly. He'd been a logistics officer, responsible for supply chains and troop movements. Not that. But he'd known. They'd all known. And he'd done nothing. The guilt sat in his stomach like a stone. Some nights he'd wake gasping, dreaming of trains packed with human cargo, of children's faces pressed against wooden slats, of his own son's voices calling to him from the darkness. He'd stopped praying years ago. What God would listen to the prayers of a man who'd worn the uniform, who'd served the machine even in his peripheral way? He was about to turn from the window when he saw it. A dark shape at the edge of his field, small and crumpled against the white expanse. A trick of shadows, perhaps, or a fallen tree branch. But something made him set down his glass, pull on his heavy coat, and step out into the bitter night. The wind cut through him like a blade as he trudged through the deep snow toward the shape. As he drew closer, his heart began to pound. It was a person, a woman curled on her side, clutching something to her chest. He broke into an awkward run, his damaged shoulder protesting. When he reached her, he dropped to his knees in the snow. Her lips were blue, her skin waxy pale, but her eyes fluttered open at his touch. Dark eyes, enormous with terror and exhaustion. She tried to scramble away from him, but she had no strength left. Bitte, bitte nicht. She whispered in broken German. Please, please don't. Then he saw what she was clutching, a baby wrapped in rags, utterly still. Klaus felt the air leave his lungs. For a frozen moment, he stared at the infant's pale face, certain he was looking at a corpse. But then he saw it, the faintest rise and fall of the tiny chest, the smallest breath of life still flickering. Mein Gott, he breathed. He looked into the woman's eyes and saw the question there, the desperate calculation. She was Jewish. He could tell from the yellow star that had been torn from her coat, leaving a pale patch of fabric. She was deciding whether to fight him, whether to use her last bit of strength to run, whether this German man in his Wehrmacht coat would be her death or her salvation. Klaus had spent the last year of his life drowning in guilt and paralysis. He'd done nothing to stop the evil around him, had told himself he was just following orders, just trying to survive, just one man who couldn't change anything. He'd let himself become complicit through his silence, through his inaction. He wouldn't do nothing now. Come, he said softly in German, then tried the few words of Polish he knew. Dom house. Warm. She stared at him, disbelieving. Tears had frozen on her cheeks. He reached out slowly, carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. I won't hurt you, he said. I promise. Your baby needs warmth. Now. Perhaps it was the tone of his voice. Perhaps it was simply that she had no other choice. Or perhaps in that moment she saw something in his face, some echo of the father he'd been, the man he'd once hoped to be, that made her decide to trust him. She didn't resist when he gathered her into his arms, the baby still clutched to her chest. She weighed almost nothing, fragile as a bird. He carried them both across the field, through the snow that seemed determined to bury all traces of mercy, toward the warm glow of his farmhouse windows. Behind them, their footprints began to fill with fresh snow, erasing the evidence of this impossible rescue, this quiet rebellion against everything the world had become. Sarah woke to warmth. Real warmth, not the false, dangerous warmth that came before freezing to death. She was lying on something soft, a bed with actual sheets and blankets. A fire crackled somewhere nearby. For a moment, she thought she'd died, and this was some strange anteroom to whatever came after. Then panic seized her. Isaac! She tried to sit up, but her body refused to cooperate. Her limbs felt like lead, her muscles screaming in protest. A gentle hand pressed her shoulder back down. Oi! Quiet! Your son is here. She turned her head and saw him, the German officer, the man who should have been her death. He was sitting in a chair beside the bed, and in his arms, carefully, awkwardly, as if he hadn't held an infant in many years, was Isaac. The baby was wrapped in a clean blanket, and as Sarah watched, the officer brought a bottle of milk to Isaac's lips. Isaac was drinking. Alive. Drinking. A sob broke from Sarah's throat before she could stop it. The officer looked at her, his weathered face creased with concern. He was very cold, he said in careful, slow German. But he's warming now. See, he drinks. Sarah tried to speak, but no words came. She could only stare at this man, this enemy, feeding her son with a tenderness that made her heart crack open. You understand German? He asked. She nodded slightly. In the ghetto, they'd all learned enough German to understand orders, to try to avoid the worst punishments. Good. My Polish is not good. He shifted Isaac slightly, supporting the baby's head with practiced ease. You've been asleep for 6 hours. I gave him goat's milk. I keep goats, you see. He was very hungry. 6 hours. Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed. 6 hours during which this man could have turned her in, could have called the authorities, could have done any number of things. Instead, he'd fed her child. Why? She whispered in German. The officer was quiet for a long moment, watching Isaac drink. Finally, he said, I have sons. Had sons. His voice caught. I know what it is to love a child, to want to protect them from the world. He looked at her then, and she saw the deep wells of grief in his eyes. I couldn't leave you there. Either of you. You're taking risk, Sarah said, her German halting but clear enough. Big risk. For Jews. Yes. He said it simply, without pride or fear. Just acknowledgement of fact. Why? She asked again. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Isaac finished the bottle, and the officer lifted him to his shoulder, patting his back gently until the baby burped. A tiny, ordinary sound that felt like a miracle in this room. Because I've done nothing, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. For 3 years I've watched and done nothing. I've told myself I had no choice, that I was just one man, that I couldn't change anything. He looked down at Isaac's small head resting against his shoulder. Maybe I can't change anything, but I can do this. I can choose this. Sarah felt tears sliding down her face. She'd spent so long among wolves that she'd forgotten there might still be men in the world. What is his name? The officer asked. Isaac, she whispered. After his grandfather. Isaac, the officer repeated, testing the name. A good name. Strong. He stood carefully and brought the baby to Sarah, placing him gently in her arms. Isaac had fallen asleep, his tiny face relaxed and peaceful for the first time in weeks. Sarah cradled her son, breathing in his scent, feeling his warmth. Alive. They were alive. And your name? The officer asked. She hesitated. Giving her name felt like giving up her last bit of armor. But this man had saved them, had fed her child, had chosen mercy when mercy was the most dangerous choice in the world. Sarah, she said. Sarah Lewandowska. Klaus Weber, he replied. Once a colonel, now just a farmer. He moved toward the door, then paused. You'll stay here, both of you, until you're strong enough, until the baby is, until it's safer. Is nowhere safe, Sarah said. No, Klaus agreed quietly. But some places are less dangerous than others. And this house. He looked around at the empty rooms, the echoing spaces where his family had once lived. This house needs life in it again. He left her then, closing the door softly behind him. Sarah sat in the warm bed, holding her son, and allowed herself, for the first time in months, to hope. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white silence. And in that silence, something impossible had taken root. Mercy, growing like a winter flower in the heart of darkness. The days that followed were strange and tentative, like learning to walk on ice. Sarah recovered slowly, her body grateful for rest and warm food after weeks of deprivation. Klaus had given her and Isaac the room that had belonged to his younger son, Johann. She tried not to think about what that meant, about the absence that hung in the air like incense. Klaus was careful with her. He knocked before entering, always announced himself, never touched her without permission. He understood, Sarah realized, what it meant to be a woman alone with a man who held all the power. He understood fear. He brought her meals 3 times a day, simple fare, but more food than she'd seen in months. Bread, soup with actual vegetables and bits of meat. Milk for Isaac. He'd shown her how to prepare the goat's milk properly, warming it to the right temperature, testing it on his wrist the way a parent does. Anna taught me, he'd said, his voice distant. With our boys. I'd forgotten, but the body remembers. She learned his routine. He rose before dawn to tend the goats and chickens, the few animals he'd managed to keep through the war. He chopped wood for the stove. He maintained the farm buildings, though there was little point now. No crops to store, no harvest to celebrate. He seemed to move through his days like a ghost haunting his own life. In the evenings, he sat by the fire with a book or simply stared into the flames. Sometimes Sarah would bring Isaac down from the room, and Klaus would hold the baby while she ate. He was good with Isaac, patient and gentle, making soft sounds that made the infant coo and wave his tiny fists. "You miss your sons," Sarah said one evening. It wasn't a question. Klaus nodded, his eyes on Isaac's face. Every moment of every day. He traced Isaac's tiny fingers with one large, scarred hand. Friedrich was 22. He wrote poetry, terrible poetry, but it made his mother laugh. Johann was 19. He wanted to be a teacher. Loved mathematics, could solve any problem you gave him. His voice cracked. Neither of them wanted to fight. But what choice did they have? "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "No." Klaus looked at her fiercely. "Don't apologize to me. Don't ever apologize to me. What your people have suffered." He couldn't finish, just shook his head. They sat in silence, the fire crackling, Isaac making small sleeping sounds. Finally, Sarah asked the question that had been burning in her chest for days. "What happens when war ends? When Germans lose? And they will lose, yes." Klaus didn't deny it. "Yes, they will lose. Are losing. Then what happens to me? To Isaac? The Poles, they..." She swallowed hard. "They helped Germans. They watched us be taken. Some of them did the taking themselves." "I know." Klaus's face was grim. "I've seen it. The collaboration. The enthusiasm. So where we go?" "I don't know," Klaus admitted. "But we have time. Weeks, perhaps months before the Russians arrive. And when they do..." He looked at her. "I'll tell them you're my cousin. From the West. That you came here when your city was bombed. That Isaac is your son from a husband killed in an air raid. They won't believe. Maybe not. But it's a story. And sometimes, Sarah, a story is all we have." He handed Isaac back to her. "For now, you're safe here. That's enough. Tomorrow will worry about itself." But Sarah could see the fear beneath his words. They both knew this sanctuary was temporary, fragile as ice in spring. One wrong word, one suspicious neighbor, one surprise inspection, and they'd all be lost, Sarah and Isaac to deportation or death, Klaus to execution for harboring Jews. Yet he kept them anyway. As winter deepened into its cruelest months, Sarah and Klaus fell into an unexpected rhythm. She began helping with the household tasks, cooking, mending, cleaning the rooms that Klaus had let fall into neglect after Anna's death. At first he protested, saying she needed to rest to recover her strength. But Sarah needed purpose, needed to feel useful, to repay in some small way the impossible debt she owed him. They talked carefully at first, then with growing ease. She told him about her life before, her marriage to David, a watchmaker with gentle hands and a quick laugh. The small apartment they'd shared in Warsaw, the way David would spend hours repairing the most delicate timepieces, his face intent with concentration. The way they danced in their tiny kitchen to radio music on Friday evenings, how he'd kissed her forehead and called her his miracle when she'd told him about the baby. She told him about the ghetto, though not everything. Some things had no words. But she told him about the hunger, the disease, the way people had tried to maintain dignity in the face of deliberate degradation. The woman who'd held Hebrew school for children in secret. The man who'd shared his last crust of bread with a stranger. The small, fierce acts of humanity that had persisted like candle flames in the darkness. Klaus listened with an intensity that was almost painful. Sometimes his hands would clench into fists as she spoke. Once, tears slid silently down his weathered face. He never looked away, never tried to diminish what she'd endured, never offered empty comfort. In turn, he spoke of his life before the war. His marriage to Anna, a farmer's daughter with a laugh like bells and a practical, no-nonsense approach to life. The way she'd managed the farm while he served, raising their sons to be kind men, good men. The letters she'd sent him at the front, full of news about the boys, about the harvest, about the small dramas of village life. He told her about the Eastern Front, about the cold that made Poland's winter seem mild, about watching boys barely older than Johann freeze to death in their foxholes, about the day he'd been hit, the strange floating sensation as his blood darkened the snow, the Russian soldier who could have finished him but hadn't, who'd just looked at him with infinite weariness and walked away. "I think about that soldier," Klaus said one evening. "Wonder if he survived, if he made it home, if he carried the same weight I do, the weight of things seen and things done and things left undone." They never spoke directly about the camps, about the systematic murder that was being carried out in the name of Klaus's people. But it hung between them like smoke, impossible to ignore. Sometimes Sarah would catch Klaus staring at nothing, his face carved with such anguish that she had to look away. "You saved us," she said once, needing him to understand. "You saved our lives." "I sheltered 2 people," Klaus replied heavily. "Thousands die every day. Tens of thousands. What I've done, it's a drop of water in an ocean of blood. To us is everything." He looked at her then, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or shared grief. The acknowledgement that in a world gone mad, one small act of mercy might not change the war, but it changed everything for the people it touched. Late one night, Sarah came downstairs to find Klaus at the kitchen table, an unfolded letter before him, a bottle of schnapps half empty at his elbow. He didn't seem drunk, just hollowed out, as if the alcohol had merely emphasized the emptiness inside him. "Klaus," she said softly. He looked up, and she saw his eyes were red. "A letter. Finally. From the Red Cross." His voice was rough. "About Johann. My son." Sarah's heart sank. She moved closer, Isaac asleep against her shoulder. "He's been declared missing, presumed dead. Near Normandy during the invasion." Klaus stared at the letter, as if the words might rearrange themselves into a different truth. "I knew. Have known for months, really. But to see it written." He touched the paper with shaking fingers. "Both my sons. Both of them gone." Sarah didn't know what to say. What words could possibly bridge this chasm of loss? She stood there, helpless, watching this strong man break apart. "They were good boys," Klaus said, his voice cracking. "Anna and I, we raised them to be kind, to help people, to see the humanity in everyone. And then the war came and took them and twisted everything we taught them. Friedrich died for a cause he didn't believe in. Johann disappeared fighting to preserve a regime built on evil." He looked up at her, his face ravaged. What kind of father raises his sons to die for nothing? Sarah set Isaac gently in his basket, then did something that surprised them both. She crossed to Klaus and wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened, shocked, then slowly, carefully, as if afraid he might break her, his arms came up to return the embrace. They stood there in the darkened kitchen, this German man and Jewish woman, both of them hollowed out by loss, both of them survivors of a war that had stolen everything. Klaus buried his face against her shoulder and wept, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Sarah held him, stroking his hair the way she would comfort Isaac, making soft sounds of sympathy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't deserve your comfort," Klaus choked out. "Not after what my people—" "You are not them," Sarah said fiercely. "You are not the ones who did this. You saved us. You chose merci. Your sons would be proud of that." They held each other as the fire burned low, 2 broken people offering the only comfort they could, presence, understanding, shared grief. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the embrace shifted from consolation to something else. Connection. Recognition. 2 souls who'd been alone too long finding unexpected solace. When they finally pulled apart, Klaus wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "Forgive me. I shouldn't have." "Don't," Sarah said. "Don't apologize for being human." Their eyes met, and something flickered there, something neither of them was ready to name. Sarah retreated to the safety of distance, collecting Isaac from his basket. "Good night, Klaus." "Good night, Sarah." But as she climbed the stairs, she found herself trembling. Not from fear this time, but from the dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire, and everything to do with the man downstairs who'd held her so carefully, as if she were something precious instead of a burden to be endured. She pressed her face against Isaac's soft hair and whispered a prayer. Though whether it was a prayer for strength to resist this impossible feeling or for forgiveness for having it at all, she couldn't say. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly. The snow began to melt in mid-March, revealing the frozen earth beneath. Sarah helped Klaus in the garden, preparing soil for planting even though they both knew the future was uncertain. Isaac, now 4 months old, lay in a basket in the sunshine, gurgling and reaching for the light. Sarah had grown stronger. Her body had recovered, filled out with regular meals and rest. But more than that, something in her spirit had rekindled. She caught herself singing sometimes while she worked, old Yiddish lullabies her own mother had taught her. She would stop when she realized what she was doing, afraid to let happiness take root in such dangerous ground. Klaus watched her more often than he probably realized. She'd look up from kneading bread or mending a shirt and find his eyes on her, an expression on his face that made her heart stutter. When their hands would accidentally touch, passing a dish, reaching for the same tool, the contact would linger a moment too long, charged with something unspoken. They were falling toward each other, she realized. Slowly, carefully, like two people walking on ice that might crack beneath them at any moment. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It was probably inevitable. The moment it crystallized came on an evening in late March. Klaus had been splitting wood while Sarah prepared dinner. He came in with an armload of logs, his face flushed with exertion, and as he passed her at the stove, he stumbled slightly. Sarah reached out instinctively to steady him, and suddenly they were standing very close, her hand on his arm, his face inches from hers. "Sarah," he breathed. She should pull away. She knew she should. This man was German, had worn the uniform, had been part of the machine even if he'd tried to remain on its edges. David had been gone only 6 months. 6 months that felt like 6 lifetimes. Loving someone else, especially someone like Klaus, felt like betrayal. Felt impossible. But when Klaus lifted his hand slowly, giving her every chance to move away, and gently cupped her face, she didn't pull back. When he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, tentatively, questioningly, she kissed him back. The kiss was soft, almost chaste. But it contained everything. All the grief, all the loneliness, all the desperate need for connection that both of them had been carrying. When they pulled apart, both were trembling. "I shouldn't have," Klaus started. "I wanted you to," Sarah interrupted. "Your husband is dead." Saying it out loud still hurt, but it was true. David was dead, or as good as dead, disappeared into the machinery of genocide. And she was alive here, with this man who'd saved her life, and who looked at her as if she were the answer to a question he hadn't known how to ask. "This is madness," Klaus said, but he didn't step away. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "We could both be killed if anyone found out. The Nazis would execute me for being with a Jewish woman. And you. I know the risks. I'm old enough to be your father. You're 56. I'm 28. Is not so much." Sarah reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines around his eyes. "I don't know what tomorrow brings. Maybe the war ends and Russians come and kill us both. Maybe Nazis discover me and we all die. Maybe." She took a shaky breath. "Maybe we have only today. Only now. Is it so wrong to take what little happiness we can?" Klaus closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man finding water in the desert. "I love my wife's memory. Will always love her." "I love my husband's memory," Sarah replied. "We'll always love him. But we are here, Klaus. Alive. Against all the odds, we are alive." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him again, more firmly this time. "Don't send me away from this. Please." He pulled her close then, holding her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "I won't. God help me, I won't." They stood there in the kitchen, the fire crackling, Isaac sleeping peacefully in the next room, and let themselves have this impossible thing. Hope, warmth, the beginning of something that should never have existed but did. That night, Sarah didn't return to Johann's room. She stayed with Klaus, and they came together with a tenderness born of shared grief and hard-won trust. They made love carefully, almost reverently, two damaged people offering each other comfort and connection in a world that had offered them nothing but loss. Afterward, lying in his arms, Sarah traced the scar on his shoulder, the wound that had brought him home, that had made it possible for him to be in that field the night she'd collapsed. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. "I don't know what I believe anymore," Klaus admitted. "But I believe you were meant to survive. And perhaps," he tightened his arms around her, "perhaps I was meant to help you do that." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, while outside the snow melted and the first green shoots of spring pushed through the frozen earth. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Sarah's life, simultaneously the happiest and the most terrifying. During the day, they maintained a careful routine, just in case anyone happened by. Sarah stayed inside or in the back garden, out of sight. Klaus handled any necessary trips to the village for supplies, spinning stories about his sick cousin from the west when nosy neighbors asked questions. But at night, behind locked doors and shuttered windows, they allowed themselves to be what they truly were. Two people in love despite everything that should have made it impossible. Klaus taught Sarah German properly, and she taught him Yiddish. They'd lie in bed, sharing words like gifts. He loved the sound of Yiddish on her tongue, the warmth of it, the ancient music. She loved how seriously he approached learning, as if each word were a bridge he was building between their worlds. They wrote letters to each other, strange as it seemed when they lived under the same roof. But Klaus said he wanted her to have something tangible, something she could keep. "When this is over," he said, "when you're safe somewhere, Palestine, perhaps, or America, I want you to have proof that this was real. That I loved you. That for a little while, in the middle of all the darkness, we found light." Sarah kept his letters in a wooden box, along with the few photographs he had of his sons. "I'll keep them safe," she promised. "Always." The danger made everything sharper, more precious. Every morning they woke up alive felt like a miracle. Every evening they survived another day felt like victory. They made a life in the margins, a small, fierce happiness carved out of impossible circumstances. Isaac thrived. He was a content baby, quick to smile, and Klaus doted on him. Sarah would watch the two of them together, Klaus making silly faces to earn Isaac's laughter, or patiently walking the floor with the baby when he fussed, and feel her heart expand with a bittersweet joy. This should have been David's role, she thought. But David was gone and Klaus was here, and Isaac deserved every bit of love he could get. "He calls you Papa," Sarah said one day, listening to Isaac's babbling. "When he learns to talk, that's what he'll say." Klaus looked stricken. "Sarah, I can't replace. You're not replacing anyone. You're giving him what he needs, a father's love." She took his hand. "David would thank you for that, I think. For keeping us alive. For loving us." They talked sometimes about after. The nebulous future when the war would end, and they'd have to figure out what they were to each other. Klaus wanted to marry her, to make it legal, to give Isaac his name and protection. Sarah wanted that too, but the logistics felt impossible. "When Germany loses, there will be chaos," Klaus said. "The Soviets will come through here like a storm. If I claim you as my wife, a German officer's wife, will they believe it? Will they care? Or will they punish you for collaborating with a German? And if you don't claim me? If I'm just a Jewish refugee you sheltered? What happens to you then? You could say you didn't know. Could save yourself. I won't do that. I won't deny you." They went in circles, trying to plan for an unpredictable future. In the end, they decided to hold on to what they had and face each day as it came. But Sarah wrote letters too, to her unborn grandchildren, to the future she hoped Isaac would have. She wrote about his father David, preserving his memory. And she wrote about Klaus, about this impossible love that had saved them. She sealed these letters and hid them with Klaus's letters in the wooden box, a time capsule of truth for whoever might find it decades hence. "If something happens to me," she told Klaus, "make sure Isaac gets these. When he's old enough to understand." "Nothing will happen to you," Klaus said fiercely. "I won't allow it." But they both knew that some things were beyond anyone's control. The danger arrived in May, sudden as a snake strike. Klaus had gone to the village for supplies, leaving Sarah and Isaac alone at the farmhouse. It was a bright morning, warm enough that Sarah had hung laundry outside to dry. She was in the kitchen, humming to Isaac, when she heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed Isaac and ran to the window. 2 cars, 1 black sedan, 1 military truck. Men in uniform getting out. SS officers. Terror flooded her system. This was it. Someone had talked. Someone had seen something. They'd come for her. She looked around wildly. Where could she hide? The attic? Too obvious. The cellar? They'd search it. The forest? Too far. She'd never make it with Isaac before they reached the door. The knock came, sharp and authoritative. Open. Now. Sarah's mind raced. Klaus had prepared for this possibility. They had a story. She was his cousin. Isaac was her son from a dead husband. She had papers, forged, but good forgeries that Klaus had paid dearly for. She had to trust that they would hold. She straightened her spine, wrapped Isaac more securely against her chest, and opened the door. 3 SS officers stood on the doorstep. The one in front was young, maybe 30, with cold blue eyes that swept over her assessingly. You are Christina Weber, Sarah said in German, using the false name Klaus had given her. Colonel Weber's cousin. And the colonel? In the village. Getting supplies. He'll be back soon. We'll wait. The officer pushed past her into the house, the other 2 following. They began moving through the rooms, opening drawers, looking in cabinets. Searching. Sarah stood frozen. Isaac clutched to her chest. The baby, sensing her fear, began to fuss. She bounced him gently, trying to keep him quiet. A baby, one of the officers noted. Your husband. Dead, Sarah said, praying her German didn't sound too accented. Killed in the bombing of Dresden. Dresden. Terrible. So many lost. But his voice held no real sympathy, just automatic platitude. He moved closer, studying her face. You have your papers? Upstairs. I can. Stay here. Jürgen, check upstairs for documents. One of the officers headed for the stairs. Sarah's heart hammered. Her papers were good, she told herself. Klaus had been so careful. But what if they checked too closely? What if they compared the photograph to her face and saw through the careful makeup Klaus had helped her apply each morning to lighten her complexion? What if? Isaac began to cry in earnest, his wails filling the house. The lead officer's face tightened with irritation. Make it stop. I'm trying, Sarah said, bouncing Isaac harder. But the baby's cries only grew louder. He was picking up on her terror, and nothing she did would calm him. I said make it stop. The officer stepped forward, his hand moving toward his holster. In that moment, the door burst open and Klaus strode in, his face carefully neutral but his eyes taking in everything. Officers, to what do I owe the pleasure of this visit? The lead officer turned to him. Colonel Weber, we've received reports of irregularities in this area. Jewish fugitives hiding in local farms. I see. And you suspect me of harboring fugitives? We suspect everyone, Colonel. These are serious times. The Führer's orders regarding the Jewish question must be carried out completely. Indeed. Klaus's voice was flat. He looked at Sarah, and something in his gaze steadied her. I see you've met my cousin Christina and her son. Came here after Dresden, poor thing. Lost everything. So she said, we're verifying her papers now. As if on cue, the officer Jürgen came down the stairs holding Sarah's forged identity documents. Found these in the bedroom, sir. The lead officer studied them carefully. Sarah fought to keep her breathing steady, to not let her terror show. Isaac had quieted slightly, reduced to whimpering against her shoulder. The silence stretched out, excruciating. Finally, the officer looked up at Klaus. These papers appear to be in order. But, Colonel, you fought for the fatherland. Surely you understand the importance of vigilance, of ensuring racial purity. I understand my duty, Klaus said carefully. I also understand family loyalty. Christina is my blood. Her papers are legitimate. If you doubt them, you're welcome to wire Berlin for confirmation. It was a bluff, a terrifying, audacious bluff. If they actually checked, the forgery would be discovered. But the lead officer hesitated, clearly weighing the trouble of verifying papers against the annoyance of pursuing what seemed like a dead end. "That won't be necessary," he said finally, returning the documents. "But Colonel, if you see or hear anything suspicious, fugitives, partisan activity, anything, you will report it immediately." "Yes, of course." The officers filed out, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Klaus walked them to their cars, shaking hands, playing the role of loyal German officer. Sarah stood at the window, shaking so hard she could barely hold Isaac. When the vehicles finally pulled away, disappearing down the road, her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, Isaac crying again, her own breath coming in ragged gasps. Klaus was beside her in seconds, pulling them both into his arms. "It's all right. You're safe. You're both safe." They almost, if Isaac hadn't cried, if you hadn't come back when you did. "But I did. And you held yourself together beautifully. You were so brave, Sarah." She turned her face into his chest and sobbed. Huge, heaving sobs born of terror and relief. Klaus held them both, rocking them gently, murmuring soothing words in German, and then more softly, in the Yiddish she'd taught him. "Schau still, mein Teer. Schau still. Be quiet, my dear. Be quiet." When Sarah finally calmed, she pulled back to look at Klaus's face. "We can't stay here. They'll come back. They'll check more carefully next time." "I know." Klaus's face was grim. "The net is tightening. The war is ending. Germany is losing badly now. That makes them more desperate, more vicious. They're trying to finish what they started before it's too late. Then what do we do?" Klaus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was determined. "We run. Tomorrow night. There's a route through the forest, leads to a village where I know people. Good people who will help. From there, we can make our way west toward the American lines. If we can get to the Americans before the Russians arrive, we'll have a chance." "You said we." "Klaus, you don't have to. I'm not letting you go alone. We're in this together, Sarah. All of us." He touched Isaac's head gently. "I've made my choice. I'm with you whatever comes." Sarah kissed him then, hard and desperate, trying to pour all her gratitude and love and fear into that kiss. When they broke apart, both were crying. "Tomorrow night," she whispered. "Tomorrow night." They had one day left in the house where they'd built their impossible love. One day before they'd have to flee into the uncertain darkness. They spent that day memorizing each other, holding Isaac close, preparing for a future that was terrifyingly unclear. Sarah added one final letter to the box, a letter explaining everything, just in case they didn't survive. She sealed the box and buried it beneath the floorboards of Klaus's bedroom, marking the spot carefully in her mind. "Someday," she told Klaus, "if we live, we'll come back for it. Or our children will. And they'll know the truth." "The truth," Klaus repeated. "That love can grow even in darkness. That mercy is always worth the risk. That we were here, together, and we chose each other against all reason." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Exactly that." They held each other through that last night, Isaac sleeping between them, and waited for dawn to break on their final day in this fragile sanctuary. They didn't make it. The next afternoon, as Klaus was loading supplies into the truck for their planned escape, military vehicles appeared again. This time there were more of them, and there was no pretense of courtesy. The lead officer, a different man, harder-faced, pushed his way into the house while soldiers surrounded the property. "Colonel Weber, we've received intelligence that you are harboring a Jewish woman and her child." "Where are they?" "I don't know what you're." "Don't." The officer's voice was ice. "We have testimony from a villager who saw a dark-haired woman here. Who heard you speaking together. Who noticed, Colonel, that you stopped attending village gatherings. That you've become reclusive. Suspicious behavior for a loyal German officer." Klaus's face went blank. "The woman is my cousin. I've already proven." "You've proven nothing but your own treachery." The officer nodded to his men. "Search the house. Find them." Klaus lunged forward, but two soldiers grabbed him, forcing him to his knees. Sarah, watching from the upstairs window with Isaac in her arms, felt her heart shatter. This was it. There was no escape this time. She could hear the soldiers smashing through the house, their boots on the stairs. She had seconds, maybe. She looked around wildly and saw the window. If she could get to the forest, maybe she could hide, maybe. But then the door burst open, and there were rifles pointed at her, and Isaac was crying, and there was nowhere left to run. "Juden," the soldier spat. "Jew." He grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward the stairs. "Don't hurt her." Klaus's voice anguished. "Please don't hurt them." They dragged Sarah downstairs. Klaus was still on his knees, 2 soldiers holding him down. When he saw Sarah, his face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, my love." "Love?" The officer laughed, a cold, terrible sound. "You dare to call this creature love? You've defiled yourself, Weber. Broken every law, every principle of racial purity. You're a disgrace to the uniform you wore." "That uniform," Klaus said quietly, "was the disgrace. What I did, protecting her, loving her, that's the only thing I've done in years that I'm not ashamed of." The officer's face went red with fury. "You'll have time to reflect on your choices. We're taking you all, the woman and her bastard child, to the camp. You, Weber, to face military tribunal for treason." "No." Klaus struggled against his captors. "Please, they've done nothing. Take me, punish me, but let them go. They are Jews. Their very existence is a crime." Sarah stood frozen. Isaac clutched to her chest. This was the end, then. After everything, the survival, the love, the brief happiness, it ended here. At least they'd had those months. At least Isaac had been warm and fed and loved. At least she'd known one more time what it was to be cherished. She looked at Klaus, wanting to memorize his face one last time. "I love you," she mouthed. "I love you," he mouthed back. Then louder, "I'll find you. I swear, Sarah, I'll find you." Silence. The officer struck Klaus across the face. "Take them away. Separate vehicles. I don't want the traitor contaminating the prisoners further." They dragged Sarah toward one truck, Klaus toward another. Isaac was screaming now, and Sarah was sobbing, and Klaus was fighting his captors with desperate strength, trying to reach them one last time. "Sarah!" His voice broke. "Sarah! Isaac! Klaus!" She couldn't see through her tears, could only hear his voice calling her name as they shoved her into the truck, as the doors slammed shut, as everything went dark. The truck lurched into motion. Sarah curled around Isaac in the darkness, surrounded by the smell of fear and unwashed bodies. There were others in here, she realized. Other Jews who'd been found, captured. All of them being taken to the same destination. She thought of the box buried under the floorboards, of the letters that would tell their story, of the proof that they'd existed, that they'd loved each other, that for a little while they'd defied the hatred that surrounded them. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Isaac, who'd stopped crying and now lay very still in her arms. "I'm so sorry, my darling. I tried. We tried." The truck rolled on through the countryside, carrying them toward whatever dark future awaited. Behind them, in another vehicle, Klaus sat bleeding and broken, his hands bound, his heart screaming Sarah's name into the void. And beneath the floorboards of an empty farmhouse, a box of letters waited in the darkness, holding the truth of an impossible love born in the heart of humanity's darkest hour. But that was just the beginning of a story that would echo across generations. Sarah and Isaac were taken to Ravensbrück, the women's camp north of Berlin. Klaus, after a brutal interrogation that left him permanently scarred, was sent to a military prison to await execution for treason. The war machinery ground on, indifferent to individual tragedies. Yet somehow, impossibly, they all survived. When the Russians liberated Ravensbrück in April 1945, Sarah was barely alive, weighing less than 80 pounds, but Isaac was still breathing, still clinging to life through sheer force of his mother's will. She'd shared her meager rations with him, had hidden him during selections, had fought like a lioness to keep him alive. Klaus was liberated from his prison by British forces in May. He returned immediately to his farm, hoping against hope that Sarah and Isaac might somehow have made it back. The house was empty, vandalized by retreating soldiers, but the floorboards in his bedroom were intact. He dug up the box of letters with shaking hands and kept it safe, waiting. Sarah, meanwhile, spent months in a displaced persons camp, slowly regaining her strength. She tried to find Klaus, wrote letters to every agency, every organization she could think of. But Germany was chaos, records were destroyed or lost, and Klaus Weber was a common name. She couldn't find him. Eventually, she made her way to Palestine, then to the newly formed Israel, carrying Isaac and the memories of a love that had saved them both. She never married again. How could she, when part of her heart had been left behind in a farmhouse in Poland? She told Isaac about his father David, all the stories she could remember, keeping his memory alive. But she also told him about Klaus, about the German officer who'd chosen mercy when mercy was a death sentence, who'd loved them enough to risk everything. If you ever find him, she told Isaac when he was old enough to understand, tell him I never forgot. Tell him I loved him until my last breath. Tell him thank you. Klaus lived another 30 years after the war, alone in his farmhouse, the box of letters his most precious possession. He never knew if Sarah and Isaac had survived. He wrote letters he couldn't send, addressed to a woman who might be dead, pouring out his heart onto paper. When he died in 1975, the farmhouse was sold to a young couple. They found the box of letters while renovating and, curious, began to read. What they discovered moved them so deeply that they tracked down Sarah Lewandowska through Holocaust survivor organizations. They found her in Tel Aviv, an elderly woman of 88 with sharp eyes and a quiet grace. When they told her they had letters from Klaus Weber, she wept, the first tears she'd allowed herself in decades. "He's gone?" she asked. "Yes. I'm sorry. 20 years ago." She nodded slowly. "Then I will see him soon enough." She looked at the box they'd brought her, reaching out to touch it with reverent hands. "May I?" She spent 3 days reading every letter, reliving those months of impossible love. When she finished, she called for her son. Isaac was 67 now, a doctor, a grandfather himself. She handed him the box. "This is your story," she told him. "Your whole story. Your father David, who loved us, and Klaus, who saved us and loved us too. Keep it safe. Pass it to your children. Let them know that even in the darkest times, there were those who chose mercy, who chose love." Isaac took the box, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I wish I could have thanked him. He knew," Sarah said softly. "He knew, darling. Every time I survived another day, every time I held you, every time I chose hope over despair, that was my thanks to him." She died 3 weeks later, peacefully in her sleep. At her funeral, Isaac shared the story of his mother and Klaus Weber, the forbidden love that had defied war and hatred and death itself. He shared the letters, reading passages aloud, and there wasn't a dry eye among those gathered. The story spread, through families, through Holocaust education programs, through people hungry for proof that humanity persists even in evil's heart. And always, at its core, was the truth preserved in those letters. That mercy matters, that love transcends, that one person's choice to see another as human can ripple across generations. Which brings us back to the beginning, to Hannah, granddaughter of Isaac, great-granddaughter of Sarah and Klaus's impossible love. I'm holding the box now, as I finish telling you this story. The leather is cracked and worn, the letters yellowed with age. But the words are still clear, still powerful. My great-grandmother's handwriting, small and neat. Klaus's, bold and slightly shaky. I've carried these letters with me for 3 years now, since my grandfather Isaac gave them to me before he died. Your story, he told me, echoing his own mother's words. Our story. Never forget. How could I forget? How could anyone forget a love this brave, this impossible, this enduring? I think about them often. Sarah, barely more than a girl, fighting to keep her baby alive in a frozen field. Klaus, a man carrying the weight of complicity, choosing at last to be more than a witness to evil. The months they had together, stolen, dangerous, precious. The decades they spent apart, each carrying the other in their hearts. I think about the choices they made. Klaus could have left Sarah in that field, could have turned them in, could have saved himself. Sarah could have hated him for the uniform he'd worn, the country he'd served, could have refused his help, refused to trust. But they chose differently. And because they did, I'm here. My grandfather lived. My mother lived. I live. We are Klaus and Sarah's legacy. Proof that love and mercy and human connection are stronger than hatred. That even when darkness seems absolute, there are those who carry light. I want to ask you something now because this story isn't just about the past. It's about choices we all make every day in our own lives. When have you witnessed or experienced an act of mercy that defied logic? When have you seen love persist against all odds? When have you chosen compassion over easy hatred? Leave a comment. I want to hear your stories. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to this channel. These stories matter. These testimonies of human resilience and love in the face of evil. They matter desperately. We can't let them be forgotten. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering with me. Thank you for carrying forward the legacy of Sarah and Klaus, and all the others who chose love when the world chose hate. Shah still, maintainers. Be quiet, my dears. Be at peace. Your story lives on.